Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. We bring you thought-provoking guests and topics every week to challenge your thinking about leadership. Our aim is to help you become the leader that you wish you always had as we learn together and lead together. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honoured today to be joined by Rowena Millward. Rowena is the co-founder of MacMorgan Next Practice Growth. She's the best-selling author of 2 books, Uncomfortable Growth and Insights to Enlighten. We're going to talk about both of those today at some level. She's also a global leader in business and personal growth. And she calls herself, and I love this, an operational expert on how to build the plane while still flying it. So I'm really excited about today's conversation. So without any further ado, Rowena, please say hello to the audience. Tell us a little bit more about that rich background of yours and what led you to be with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. It's an honor to be on this podcast and chatting with you and also your listeners. So thank you for having me. So a little bit about my background. I started my career in corporate and I spent about 20-ish years in corporate, working for big companies, first in Australia, and then I had an opportunity to go overseas. So when I was about 30, I moved to the US and spent 4 years working in the US, which I have lots of stories about. So fascinating stories just about culture and places and embracing what's new. And then I actually had a serious health scare. So, I needed to come back to Australia, not just only from a health perspective, but also from a family connection perspective. So that was back in 2007. And then I was really fortunate to have a fantastic company that I worked for who really helped me through that period. So that was with Johnson & Johnson, the company I ended up working for 16 years. So they helped me when I had my health scare, which was cancer. And then I came back to Australia. They helped me to come back and really supported me in getting back up on my feet and then also coming back into my career. So there's lots to talk and unpack about that whole era, which I'm more than happy to do because I believe that, the hard things are what we learn the most from. But I then went back to work. As most things in life happen, my career was on track and I was really happy doing what I was doing. But my husband ended up not being happy in his, and he ended up getting this opportunity to take a job in Singapore. So this time we followed his job, and at this point we had 2 beautiful little girls. So we packed up the family, moved to Singapore. I was fortunate that again, J&J, helped me to then transfer my job into a new job in Singapore. But as life is unpredictable, the irony was that I loved my new job in Singapore, probably more than my job in Australia, but my husband hated his, and we'd moved the whole family for his job. So we ended up, I just said to him, look, no one should be unhappy and really unhappy in their job. And so we've always had this philosophy around parallel pathing, which is this idea that just follow every opportunity because you don't know where it's going to lead. And actually, there's no decision to be made until there's a decision in front of you. So I said to him, oh, David, yes, look for jobs. And he was looking for jobs in Singapore. But ironically, a job came up back in Australia. And he really thought it was unlikely that he would get it. The interview process went for months. And we were both, oh, no, there's these other leads in Singapore. I'm going to be in Singapore for a while longer. But of course, the job comes through in Australia and he really wanted it. So then we had the fun of moving back to Sydney with the kids 12 months later. And I was really fortunate again that I was able to continue doing my job outside of Singapore because it was a Singapore-based role. So again, J&J supported me in that. So they were part of the bumps in my career, I guess. That led to, I guess, a point in 2014 where my job needed to move back to Singapore again. It's all to do with tax and the type of job and all that sort of stuff. And that was a point where we basically both felt it wasn't right for our family. So it was an interesting inflection point because I think prior to then, we both felt we could put our careers first, but, with each other because the kids were little. And when I say first, I mean from a geography point, not from an everyday time point. But we felt we could move to the US. We felt we could move to Singapore. The kids were younger. But then as they started to get a bit older and they were in school, we just felt it wasn't right to just pick up and move again. And we both love picking up and moving. So it's not that we didn't like it. We really loved it and that whole experience, but we just felt it wasn't right for all of us. And so it was a really hard decision, but I ended up taking a redundancy from a company I love and, who had given me amazing opportunities over 16 years and who I'd, really worked hard for. Like I was hugely committed, loved the people, still love the people that I worked with from now. So it was a really hard decision. It felt a bit more like a divorce, to be honest, because it was such a big part of my life from a connection point as well as from a work point. But I felt it was the right decision. And so that became another inflection point around, well, what do I want to do? So, and at this point, I was around the age of 42, 43, and I actually didn't know what I wanted to do. And I just said, look, no, I don't know. I just want to take some time off, think about it. But as the universe unfolded, as it so happened, I just did a little bit of consulting work for 7 West Media, Channel 7, who I'd had relationships with from a business point as one of the key clients of theirs when I was managing media for Johnson & Johnson. And it was, I remember it distinctly because they said to me, oh, we want you to take a job. Like, we really want you to head up client partnerships. And I said, oh, no, I'm not looking for a job. I don't want a job. But what I'll do is I'll come in and do a couple of months and help you and put together a plan, and I'll even identify the right person, etc. So we ended up in, I guess, more of a consulting relationship, which ended up lasting 3 years. But what was great about that is I wasn't a full-time employee and I worked for them a couple of days a week, not 100% of my time. And so I was also able then to start doing and thinking about my own business and my own consulting business, which was almost, I'd say, the perfect combination of going from a big corporate into something which was still familiar and I knew how to do, but also gave me the space and I guess the creativity, the space for creativity to design what I wanted as my next thing. So that was fantastic. And my husband, David, he has a similar background. So he ended up leaving his corporate job and we both started to create and run the MacMorgan business. So as you can probably see, my last name is Millward, but my married name is Morgan, and there's a whole heap behind that too. So we both run MacMorgan. But then a few years ago, about 3 years ago, I came across a fabulous community called Thought Leaders. And it's basically a collation or a community of people from all different fields who know what they're doing. So a lot of people 40 plus, 50 plus, 60 plus, but they want to create what they call a practice. And this was a point I was thinking, oh, isn't that just a small business? But as I was come to understand, no, it's quite different. And the fundamental difference is in a practice, people buy you. In a small business, they buy the business brand. And I said to David, I think we're a practice because most of the clients who we worked with, people who knew us or people who knew someone who knew us. And I really enjoy working direct with the clients rather than managing teams of people who work with the clients. So we actually pivoted or changed our business model. Previously, we'd had some employees and we had an office and the stuff that a small business has. And we created more of a practice model, which is where not only do people buy you, but you need to create your own IP. So, and up until that point, like I knew lots of stuff from having fantastic training from lots of great companies, but I hadn't necessarily stepped back and said, well, hold on, what do I have to give to the corporate world and the people in the corporate world? And how would I put it together? How would I frame it? And so that was actually a really big shift in my thinking where I stepped back and said, what can I create that's Rowena rather than what can I package together, which is really smart stuff out in the universe of smart things that can help people and businesses. And that has led to, I would say, a lot of joy. I didn't know I wanted to be a writer. I didn't know I wanted to create my own IP. But now that I've been doing it for about 3 years. I absolutely love it. And it's interesting because as I work with people, they basically look back and say to me, yeah, but you used to do that in your corporate jobs. And they're like, yeah. Remember you created that whole integrated marketing communication model that you rolled out across the world and you led all the training in the countries. And I'm like, oh yeah, I created that, didn't I? So it's actually interesting that a lot of what I find that we love has lots of signals in our past. And it's just that we're not necessarily aware of this is a talent or something that could be developed further. So that's been a fabulous insight and learning. And that has led to my 2 books, which are quite different in style. So the first one I launched end of last year called Insights to Enlighten. It's a whole lot of 75 different ideas and it's all on 2 pages, where there's some insights or, 300 words or so of writing, but every piece has a model. And the model is there to help show how things connect or how to help people apply it. And the reason why I felt really passionate about this book is because I know that leaders are really busy in their jobs all day. And I always like to be able to just have a small snippet of an idea to help me in the moment. And that's what it's designed for. It's designed to be like a coach in your pocket. So whether it's something that you need to reflect on yourself or whether it's something you want to share with your teams or a peer or whoever, pretty much you can go, this is my situation. Let me look in the book under the titles. There's an insight here and there's a framework or a model just to help me think through how that could be applied or how that could help. So my first book, Insights to Enlighten, has a lot of different types of chapters. So some is around personal growth, some is around business, a lot around leadership, culture, ways of working, capability. And then there's also some bits around marketing as well. So it's the little snippets that you can just use on the run, use as a morning reflection, and hopefully just give you time to reflect and think about, okay, what am I trying to do? How could I help someone? How could I make it more meaningful? And then I had the writing bug and decided that during lockdown, end of last year, it was the perfect time to be able to write another book. And this book, interestingly enough, Uncomfortable Growth, Own Your Reinvention, the second book, is actually the book I've wanted to write for about a decade. And it's been kind of like a seed in my mind for about a decade. But it was really that whole journey of then coming into thought leaders, creating your own IP, my movement into not just business growth, but personal growth. And then how do you put something together that can be really helpful for people who don't have time to research everything in detail, but want to be able to understand the implication and apply it. So it's a book which is really designed for how you own your own growth and expand your life. And how do you understand what holds you back, which is the fear wiring, versus what helps you to grow? And how do you identify and self-manage with practical tools to be able to help you do it? And that really is my area of passion. Just even writing that book has ignited the clarity that I was looking for to say, yes, this is what I want to do more of. This is kind of where I think I can add the most value between business and personal growth. And it gives me great joy to be able to have those deep conversations with people, but also help them self-navigate. So how do they navigate crossroads? How do they navigate challenges and choices? How do they think about their decisions? But also, how do they think differently and change those decisions when they're no longer serving them? Because there is no perfect life. It's all made of ups and downs. And it's really about how do you navigate and manage that.
All right. Thank you, Rowena, for that very rich introduction to get us started today. There's lots to unpack there, and I'd like to start going through that. And we will get to the books. We'll get to the books towards the middle of the interview, let's say. There's a number of different things I take from what you were just saying. Life does send you bumps in the road. Life does present you with opportunities and decision points. And what I'm hearing from you here is that you approached those opportunities and you made the decisions and followed the flow for some time, but then something emerged for you towards the end where you started to design your own future, making your own. So that example that you gave around the 7 Media Group and thinking about how do I design what I want out of this instead of just following what the opportunity does. And that's an interesting thing for everyone to think about. And there's different times in your career where you might do that, where you might just go, here's an opportunity, it's right in front of my face, dive in the deep end of the pool And then there's other times you might step back and go, well, what can I design out of this? And then what I heard there is your finding of joy and fulfillment, and that emergence of purpose is what I'll call it. But there were hints along your career that if you look back, you'll find those moments. And for you, it's the joy that you get from creating something that doesn't exist, but you were doing that, but maybe you didn't know that you were doing that. And when you look back, it emerges for you. So I think that's really interesting. Some other things I'd like to unpack. Let's start with, okay, you are a cancer survivor, so well done. Congratulations. It's so good that you're here with us today and you came through it. But what I wanted to unpack was Johnson & Johnson. And you're saying that the company was really supportive during that time of you. There's lots of leaders that listen to this show that have team members that go through trauma, that go through difficult times. What do you take from your experience with Johnson & Johnson that you can share with others about how to lead people when they're going through troubled times?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if I step back into my own experience and then I guess take out the insights, the first thing I think with any big thing that you're not expecting is there's a period of shock and disbelief, and you can almost feel frozen, particularly if it's it may not be a health issue, but in my case, it took the doctors a while to figure out what was going on. So there was a few weeks where you didn't know. And I think what was great about Johnson & Johnson in that context is they said, just figure this out. It will take as long as it takes, but we're here for you. And so I ended up stopping work while they were doing all the tests and all that sort of stuff, but they stayed connected with me. So they would call, I'd have many different friends, this is before FaceTime, many different people from work who would just call and say, how are you going? Let's just have a conversation. They'd come and visit in hospital. They would send care packages. They'd send little cards. And what was really nice is it wasn't just, the card from everyone or the thing. It was lots of little things that people did. And then they were able to share also their experiences they've either had personally or with their families. And so I felt that was really critical and just gave me that feeling that they were there for me outside of work, because this thing that was happening was all consuming and it was bigger than work. And then the next part was, you don't know the timeline for things like cancer, and the doctors have to let it unfold and then evaluate it along the way. And throughout that time, they basically said, you have a job, absolutely, when you come back, but don't think about work. Because one of the things that goes through your mind is, besides, will I live? But what about the things that are part of my life now and that I've worked really hard for? And so they were able to basically, just reassure me that whatever unfolds, that they would help figure it out with me and that I wasn't to worry about work. And so as a consequence, I didn't worry about work. And I think that that's really important, because you need your energy and your focus to be elsewhere. You need to focus on getting better or staying positive or thinking about things that will help you on that journey rather than kind of take you away or use up your energy. And so that was fantastic. And as it transpired, once I'd had all the chemo and I'd been given the all clear, I really wanted to move back to Australia. And I think it was really hard for my family with me being in the US, because a long plane right away to see me. And also we weren't near either of mine or my husband's family. He's Scottish. So his family was in Scotland and my family were in Australia. And so we wanted to move back to be near family. And the other point too was just before the cancer, I'd had my first baby. So we also had this beautiful baby. She was only 6 weeks old when I was diagnosed. So it was a really convoluted, complex time as a new mum, as well as having cancer. But as a consequence, I think sometimes your thinking shifts also when you have a child, because you want that joy to be shared with family. And so Johnson & Johnson, they said to me, look, if you want to move back to Australia, we will figure out a way to move you back. There wasn't a job currently there. My job had been backfilled. They were, of course, managing a lot of things like headcount and costs and all those sort of things. So it wasn't easy to bring me back, but they did. And they just said, you let us know. And it may take us a month or two to figure out how this can work, but you let us know. And if that's what you want, we will figure out a way.
And with the way that they stood by you in all of that, how did it make you feel about the company and the people that you work with?
Oh, like they were family. So, it wasn't just about what I could output in a job. It was about me, the person, and, the amount of support and care they showed when I really needed that, and how they said it's not about the job, it's about you. It made me feel like they were family.
Now, I don't know a lot about Johnson & Johnson, but I want to test something with you here because there is something I do know about them that I think might be at play here, and that is the strength of the credo. So Johnson & Johnson, quite famous for having a credo that they give to all of their employees, and not only do they give it, they give the license to everyone to ask the question, is this credo? Like, so if they see an action of the company, they see a decision being made, and they question whether it's in line with the credo, everyone has the ability to raise their hand and say, is this credo? In your experience with what you went through, how much do you think that credo and those values and beliefs were a part of how you were treated?
I think they're a huge part. So because it's part of how people think and it's part of how they behave. So it wasn't even a question, okay, let's do the return on investment of letting Rowena have however long she needs off work versus running a business. When it came down to it, it was we have to do the right thing by our people. And in the credo, it talks about doing the right thing for the doctors and nurses, for the patients, for employees, and shareholders is actually last. And I experienced that. In my case, I was a patient as well as an employee. And there wasn't a question of the financial shareholder return part, like what's our payback. It was, this is the right thing to do. And this is what you do for family.
Thank you for sharing that so openly with us. So that's what I wanted to test is we talk a lot about values and beliefs and making sure that values and beliefs are not just something that's put on the wall, but people live and breathe it. And that's what I've heard about with Johnson & Johnson, and you're really reinforcing that for me. The other thing that you mentioned in your introduction was about the different culture, and you were specifically talking about the US culture. Let me put this to you and say that there are many people that look from, let's call it the outside, and they make assumptions that Anglo-Saxon countries, US, Canada, UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, that we all have the same culture, but we don't. So tell us more about your experience, about what you found in the differences in culture in those countries.
Yeah, it was really fascinating. And it's exactly what you say, because on the surface, it's obviously much closer than, say, a country like Australia and Japan, where you can visibly see different language, different food, different way of living. So with those cultures, you expect there to be a difference between Australia and the US. There is the assumption that they're pretty close, particularly when I think Australia has also shared a lot of US, not just advertising, but TV shows growing up. We grew up with the Brady Bunch. We grew up with Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie. So going over to the US, I don't think I appreciated that. And one of the biggest differences comes in how we think about the individual versus the collective. So Australia I can articulate this because I've seen the difference in the US. In Australia, it's more about of course you do your best and you want to try and be your best, but it's about your friends, you work to live, not live to work. The dream is how do you own your house so you can retire? And even in the working culture, because I think it's also a smaller country, you don't have the number of people and specialisms. So you tend to do a lot of everything. And I articulate it as the swim lanes. In Australia, we don't have set swim lanes. You kind of swim all over the pool and just figure out how to get to the other end. And I didn't appreciate that going to the US. So going over, there is a much greater focus and I think level of pressure and competitiveness. It's about who are you? You have to tell others. And I think it does go back to, anyone can be president. So they say that. So everyone feels they have to strive to be president.
Always striving to be their best individually. So I'm just going to pick up from where you were. So knowing those differences, we've got a lot of leaders that are leading multinational teams these days, right? So it's the world is increasingly global. What advice can you give to leaders out there that might be leading a global team that's got people from the UK, from the US, from Australia, from Asia, from different cultures around the world?
I think it's to look beneath the conversations as to what are some of the beliefs inherent in that culture. And they can be overtly different or subtly different. And it makes sense that every culture is different. Every individual is different. Every country has a different flavor or culture. And so when you start with that, don't just be focused on what the discussion is around the work. Be focused on the people, but what leads them to think and behave as they do, and try and tease out what is just that person versus the culture. And it's really rich to have conversations with people about that. So chat with them. And, I found it really interesting just to say, here's how we think in Australia in general, as a generalization, as a country culture. Here's how we think. Here's how people behave. Here's what they do. What is that like for you in your country? What were some of the beliefs when you were growing up? Because I find so much is set when you're younger in how you were raised, and just tease them out. It's a fascinating and fun discussion to have, but tease them out because it really helps you to understand then how that manifests into the work.
So what I'm hearing there is to be curious, ask better questions, and take a genuine interest.
Yeah. And I think focus on the unspoken. So what's happening beneath the actual discussion, the unspoken conversations, because it's beyond what happens in the work. It's what's underneath. And we usually don't have the conversation about what's underneath because we're focused on the work. So be really mindful to have those conversations on those differences or similarities and how that played out. And people love it. They really enjoy those deeper, beneath the surface conversations. That doesn't have to be personal stuff if that's not where people are ready to share. It can just be about how you were raised and how do people think and what are the expectations of your families growing up? What was it like at university or wherever you went? And how have you felt as you've tried different roles, different types of things throughout your adult life as well?
I think that's wonderful advice, and people do enjoy that, and then they feel included. They feel included when they have a voice and they have a platform to share a bit about their culture and a bit about themselves. Really good, Rowena. I want to get to the books now, and let's start with Insights to Enlighten. You mentioned earlier that it's like a coach in your pocket. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, because it's all short ideas. So there's 75 different ideas, and each of them has about 300 words and a visual, which pulls it all together. And it just means that rather than having to read a whole book on a topic, which is still something that I say people, if they're interested, they should definitely do. It's something that you can have on hand. So say you're observing something or noticing, or you just want some advice about a particular topic, you can pull out the book, easily find which heading it's under, have a read of it and see if it can actually help you in the moment. And that's the in the pocket bit. So you can just pull it out, keep it at your desk, use it, share it with your team. So it's very easy to be able to share with people because it's short. I mean, it's hard to share a whole book unless everyone's actually read it, and just apply it in the moment.
Can you give us an example? What would be a topic that you would look up?
Yeah. So, for example, one might be around ways of working. And that's a very nebulous kind of idea, ways of working. People would use that term, but it's like, what does it mean? And so what I do is I define in a short snippet and a visual, what are ways of working about? So ways of working is not just about alignment around vision and expectations and roles. It's also about processes. It's also about the culture and how that underpins how you apply processes, how you resolve pain points. There's also a piece which is around how people collaborate, and people collaborate in different ways. So suddenly, people will often say to me, oh, we've got these silos and people aren't talking to each other, and it's just really holding things up, and I feel that we're not having the right conversations. And then I'll say, oh, I think what you're talking about is ways of working, but let's use the model and let's identify where you see that pain point coming from. And if someone's talking about silos, it's usually about a process. It's usually about the trust and the ability to have the right conversations, or it's also sometimes it's about the structure and how it's not helping the operational flow to happen in an efficient and effective way.
Yeah, really interesting. Interesting reference. I'm going to have a look at it. and see, and I encourage the audience to do so as well and see if it can be helpful to you. Let's get to uncomfortable growth. So you said that this is the book that you wanted to write for a decade. What drove you to do that?
I think the idea started way back when, I think going through hard stuff like having cancer at the same time as having, my first baby, had no idea what I was doing with both. And coming out the other side eventually was a point where I could look back and say, I have grown so much from that experience, but it was awful. And not everything is as extreme as that example, but there's a lot of stuff that happens which is uncomfortable. And I feel that the uncomfortable side doesn't get talked about much. And, the word growth is used in every second sentence in corporate, so whether it's growth of the business, growth of products, growth in clients and customers, growth in development of people, it's used constantly, but there's always this positive assumption behind it. And the reality is growth is hard. So companies will talk about change and everyone goes, yeah, change is hard, because that's almost the word they've used. But actually the objective isn't change. The objective is growth, and growth is also hard. So I wanted to be able to go into how to grow, but recognize that it's not easy, that there's a lot of work behind it.
It's certainly not easy. If I can ask you a challenging question, I'd say that the objective of growth is not to be easy. It's not to be comfortable. It's growth, right? So you said that a moment ago. So would you say that if growth is not uncomfortable, it's not going to be successful?
I think we grow more and faster from challenge, but I still think you get growth from things which can be positive. So, for example, I talked about not being sure what I wanted to do, but then falling into that situation with Seven West Media and falling into the thought leaders community. That didn't come from something hard. That just came from right place, right time, right mindset, I guess, and following it through. So I think we grow, but I think we grow from all of it. So both the positives that sometimes just unfold for us, but also we definitely grow from the hard stuff as well. And I think what's really interesting about the hard stuff is that it can feel like a door is slamming shut on us in the moment, but actually that slam shut is what creates a completely new window to open. And so that's why, one of the exercises I encourage people to do, and it's really simple but really powerful, is your own life timeline, where you've just got one axis, which is your age, like kind of periods in your life. So I define my life up into roughly decades. And then you plot the things that were fantastic above the line. So the things with a plus above the line, and the things that were really hard, you plot below the line. And I encourage people to do it for their whole life because everything is connected, but you can also do it just for an aspect of your life, like your career. But when you actually write it down and you start to look at the things, you'll see that there is this up and down, like a heartbeat, the visual going up and down, but things are connected. And a hard thing often leads to a completely new thing, which can become an incredible positive, and vice versa. We never really stay constantly above the line or below the line, and they're connected. And what's powerful about that exercise is the ability to step back and go, how has it made me now think and behave? Because, what's the famous saying? We are the sum of our experiences. And it creates beliefs, whether it's from trauma or whether it's from good stuff, it creates beliefs which may be serving us, but they may not be. They may be limiting. And so being able to identify, not just what happened, but what did it really mean to me? How has it created how I think is one of the most powerful ways to then understand how do you start to think about your own choices, what you want, and also your growth. Because I'm a big believer that once you have this awareness and the tools, you can own your own growth. And it's not all about going full throttle and like faster. It's about what is the right level of growth across different aspects of your life. And these are your current decisions, but you can change them. So you change your decisions, and that's how you can continue to live the life that you actually want rather than by default.
So I'm hearing something important there. It sounds like a double loop learning, right? So I love this idea of plotting it out and doing this graph. But what I'm hearing from you in the language is you're not just looking at what happened, you're looking at how it reshaped the way you think and the way that you see the world. Tell us more about how you do that. Instead of just looking at the activities and going, oh, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. How did it shape the way I think? How do you do that?
So when people, after they've plotted it out, I usually say to people, choose the 10 biggest moments of your life, the things that really impacted how you thought or how you behave, how you are. So just choose 10. And with those 10, I then ask them 3 questions, which I originally heard from Matt Church, who's also an incredible thought leader. And the first question is, what happened? And that people are able to answer that pretty fast. What happened? The second question is, what did it mean? So what did it mean to you? Like, what was the implication of what happened? And the third question is, what is it actually about? So how did that actually shape how you think and how you now act? And when you're able to distill it into those 3 questions and answer it, it actually helps you identify what is that belief that sits behind the event. So for example, for me, I talked about my cancer situation. What happened? I was diagnosed with cancer 6 weeks after I'd had a baby at the age of 33. That's what happened. What did it mean? It meant that you can't control things. You think everything's going great and fine, but suddenly it's not. And so what is it all about? For me, it manifested as just figure out what's important and go after that. Go after your dreams. Don't hold back because you may not be here. That I was lucky and other people aren't lucky. So I could have died at the age of 33. And that's an extreme example, but there's lots of examples like that once you start to think about it and reflect on it from your own life, you can actually see a lot of what has shaped you and decide whether it's actually a good thing and helping you or whether it's not a good thing.
Yeah, really good, Rowena. And I think if everyone looks, they can see their own examples, maybe not all as extreme as yours, but you can think of different things that happen in your life and you might not have even noticed the significance at the time, but later on you realize that it did reshape the way you see the world, reshape the way you think. Yeah, really interesting. You speak about uncovering your own triggers. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so we've all got hard things in our past, and often hard things or trauma can lead to triggers, things that we react to. And, I like to talk. So triggers is part of what I call our small self. And I like to simplify things, hence my love of little models and visuals. But in a really simple way, everyone has what I call their small self, which is fear-based. And in that we have triggers, which are emotions or things that we're scared of or we're frightened of, which live in our subconscious. And if the environment or the context or the conversation is such that it can trigger an emotional response in us. And everyone has that. On the other side is what I call our best self, and that's the growth driven. And what is really important to keep in mind is that both the small self and the best self exist simultaneously. And I think sometimes people think, I figure out my small self and then I can be my best self. Well, it's like that graph. You go up and down. And the fact that we're wired for fear and that wiring is stronger than growth means that if you don't understand your small self, which includes your triggers and where they come from and why they exist, then it's hard to be your best self more often. So my philosophy and what I've seen and spoken to a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists in this space is that when you know your small self, then you actually reduce the likelihood that it's just going to trigger. You can understand why it exists. And it's when you understand it and friend it, for lack of a different word, that when it raises its ugly head, you can go, I know why you're there. And I know that's in my small self, but I know who you are and I'm going to choose something different. And it gives you the ability to stop reacting and actually think about the benefits of acting through those fears and managing those triggers. Because I think particularly post-COVID, where multiple fears were triggered simultaneously across the entire world, there has been a significant increase in fear-based behaviors which have been triggered by COVID. But prevention is always better than cure. And maybe this is me talking from my J&J days, but prevention is so much better than cure, because if you need a cure, it's because you're in a place where you need serious treatment. And so uncomfortable growth is very much around understanding your small self and your best self, but how do you self-manage your small self so you can be your best self more often?
I'd like to build up some of the things I'm hearing from you, Rowena, because I think it is really powerful. So first of all, very true. We are physiologically wired for fear. It's all about survival. So our number one role as a living entity is our own survival, and therefore our antennae are very acutely aware of risks around us, and they convert into fear to get our attention. Then what I'm hearing from you, though, is that when you've got the self-awareness around what those fears are and what those fears are really about, you're then in a position to reframe that fear and for you to control the fear instead of the fear controlling you. And controlling the fear is about the reframing part, is to then look at it and go, the perceived benefits of stepping into the fear, leaning in, whatever you want to call it, are greater than the fear itself. And therefore you can shift and you can move and you can be your best self. How does that sit with you?
Beautifully. That's exactly what is in uncomfortable growth. And there's actually a formula I have in chapter 10 called the uncomfortable growth formula, which is reframe fear times action. So moving through the fear times randomness. And randomness part is obviously the way to activate more possibilities to find what you want.
Tell us more about this randomness. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I think that we often wait for opportunities to come to us, and sometimes they do, right? So say if you're unhappy in your job, it's not great, and a headhunter calls you up and you're like, oh, okay, well, that feels better than where I am today. I'm going to respond to that and, I'm going to explore that and see if I get the new job. What you've done there is you've actually waited for an opportunity to come to you. And sometimes they're great, but the reason why we wait is because we don't like the uncertainty of exploring in general as humans. That goes back to that fear wiring. That uncertainty is not something we love. So if I build on that same example, if someone was unhappy in their job, then there's a number of different avenues they can take. They can talk to the HR or their manager in their company. They could talk to a number of different headhunters. They could have coffee with people they know and just let them know that they're looking around. But it's a matter of taking action to create more possibilities, because one of the facts that I've experienced in my life is that nothing succeeds as planned. And I think in our minds, we have these really clear plans. It's like, this is what I want. But nothing succeeds as planned. And if you take that as true, then you can see the value of introducing action with randomness, not just the stuff that already exists. So create new possibilities. Talk to 10 people that you already know, because they may know of jobs going, or they may actually go, you know what, we've got something coming up and it's not even advertised yet, but you would be perfect. Or I know of someone who's looking for someone exactly like you. So introducing randomness basically fills the funnel with lots of possibilities, and they will fall through a funnel and create opportunities, but more than what you had when you were just waiting.
I'm hearing some really powerful things and I want to talk through it. So if you're sitting there and you're unhappy with where you are, or if fear's getting the better of you, sitting there and waiting for something doesn't create new opportunities, but the action does. So getting out there and doing something, getting into momentum creates new opportunities. But there might also be, together with opportunities, that might also be some adversity around the corner as well. So, and the randomness, what I'm hearing from you is the randomness could be opportunity knocking, or it could be adversity around the corner. And if you're in a better mindset, you've been able to understand your fear, you've been able to take action, you're going to be in a better position to weather the storm of adversity, be more resilient. You might even be able to convert adversity into opportunity if you're really on your game. And when opportunity knocks, that you're going to be ready to answer the door. That's what I'm hearing. How does that go?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I would add probably a little bit more nuance to what you've said. And I think we generally don't explore because we don't want to waste people's time. So it links back to small fears, not necessarily big fears, but small fears. It's like, oh, I don't want to waste a person's time by having a coffee with them when I don't know what I want. I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to talk to a headhunter if I don't think that I'm actually going to get the next level job and that's really what I want. So the possibility piece is basically about being okay with exploration. And earlier, in our discussion, I talked about this idea of parallel pathing. And it's something that my husband and I have always done. And that's led me to better articulate it. So the experience of parallel pathing. And, at the heart of that is you don't know. So we don't know if we're, going to be moving or not, or I just know you're unhappy. So put antennas out, like activate, and I'll activate possibilities with people, and let's just see what's there, because at the end of the day, there's no decision to be made until there's a decision in front of you. And what you also said earlier really resonated with me around part of it is activating possibilities or potential things, but part of it is also shaping. So we talked about the 7 West Media opportunity. And when you've got lots of possibilities, some of them will actually become something more tangible. And that's when you've got the opportunity to shape it, to design it into something which may not have been the intent at the start. And I think that's a really important part of the process of being able to create something which is going to be great.
Yeah, I love it, Rowena, and that brings it nicely around that shaping, designing your future, creating opportunities and getting out there and being ready that when those opportunities start to line up, what are you going to do? And that's when the decision comes in. Yeah, there's no, like what you say, there's no decision to be made until there's a decision to be made, right? But unless you've done that work, maybe that fork in the road will never appear, right? Really good.
I also love what you said about, sometimes it can not work out. And I've had that experience too. You've gone through that process and you've got the possibilities and the opportunities, and you make a decision and it looks great and you're super excited, and then it's horrible. And that happens sometimes. Like the best laid plans don't necessarily come to fruition in the way you expected or the way that they appeared before they unfolded. And I think that's why these tools are so important, because if you do end up in it's not working out, then you can activate new possibilities. You can go through that again and get your way out. And I had when I first moved to the US, that's exactly what happened. I moved, I looked like a great job. I got a promotion to the US. I was looking after Neutrogena acne cleansing, which is one of the biggest portfolio. It was a dream for both of us to have a life adventure before kids. So we're moving to the US, somewhere we both hadn't lived. And the Johnson & Johnson were going to look after my husband's visa. It was all looking great. We're going to rent our house in Sydney. So it's all looking good. Anyway, we get there and a couple of really hard things happen. So one, the US government and visa granting is a very long process. So we were told it could take, 4 or 5 weeks, and it actually took 9 months. And during that time, my husband couldn't even look for a job because you can't do anything in the US without a work visa. So that was a down. The second part was they had a big restructure as soon as I got there, and the job changed significantly. And they had, so the job wasn't what I expected because it changed as soon as I got over there. And then the third part too was we assumed that because Los Angeles has 20 million people, pretty much the size of Australia, that there'd be lots of other marketing jobs. As it turns out, the US is much more geographically skewed to types of jobs. So there's very little marketing jobs in Los Angeles for my husband, other than, say, in the movie making industry, which is not his background. All the jobs are up on the East Coast. So, and then our house in Sydney didn't rent for whatever reason. And, so then you look at the job, you look at the ability for my husband to work and do something exciting, like the financial side of we were paying rent, but our house wasn't rented, and that was stressful. And it was like, this is definitely not the plan we thought we were stepping into. But what we did was then we just went, okay, what are our options? And my husband needed to be up on the East Coast where there's lots of jobs. And so we activated those possibilities. We talked to people. I talked to other people within Johnson & Johnson. Their main consumer head office is up on the East Coast. I talked with the people at Neutrogena. My husband ended up getting his own visa independently. He ended up in a job with Samsung. And we ended up in Princeton where we spent 3 years and loved it. So I just think too, the cycle of this is constant. And just because we've invested in creating something doesn't guarantee it's going to succeed as planned. But you can always, once you've got the skills, you can always reapply them and use them to create that next situation, which could be brilliant. And that's been very much my life experience.
Yeah, well done, Rowena. And I really like this. And the word create has come up so many times today. And that's what you're doing. You're looking at everything that's around you and you're creating something from the opportunities that you're either creating those opportunities or you're looking at the levers that you do have and you're creating your world from that. So really enjoyed today's discussion, Rowena. I'd like to draw us to a close now. We'll go into our rapid round. I'll just say one thing before we do that is that there's much more in the book. Rowena and I have focused in a lot on this element around reframing fear and about this randomness, but there's other things in there about the 4 cores of a whole life, about questions that you can ask yourself to get you to where you need to be, etc. So I do highly recommend that you take a look at the book. There's more richness in there than just us scratching the surface of it today. So to bring us to a close, I'd like to go into our rapid round, Rowena. So the first one is, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
That you can steer your life, but you can't control it.
Yeah, okay, very good. And what's your favourite book?
My favourite book from a leadership perspective is one called Synchronicity by Jawalski. And it's a book I first read when I was 25 and I've reread it 4 times.
Oh, wow. Okay. What's your favourite quote?
I love Dr. Seuss. I love the meaning and the simplicities. I love a lot of his quotes for adults, actually. And one of my favorites is, don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened.
Yeah, that's nice. Okay. And finally, there's going to be people out there that are really intrigued by all of this. How do they get in contact with you, Rowena, if they'd like to know more?
Yeah, so they can find me on LinkedIn under Rowena Millward, or you can email me at rowena@macmorgan.co. Or if you just Google Rowena Millward, you will find my website and it's got all my contact details there. And yeah, I really enjoy talking, creating, connecting with people. So the universe throws you opportunities. So if you feel that it would be great for us to connect, please do take that action.
All right, brilliant, Rowena. Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure talking with you today. Congratulations on your success of the 2 books and also on your business. And thank you for sharing you so openly with us today. Thank you for listening to The Leadership Project at mixbeers.com. A huge call out to Faris Sadek for his video editing of all of our video content and to all of the team at TLP. Joanne Goes On, Gerald Calabo, and my amazing wife, Say Spears. I could not do this show without you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel where we bring you interesting videos each and every week. And you can follow us on social, particularly on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, in the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and join us on this journey as we learn together and lead together.